Hey everybody, I'm going to start with a quick question. What are some of the key habits that COVID-19 left you with? In my case, apart from washing my hands and sanitizing them regularly, the other important habit that COVID-19 left me with is the habit of online purchases. So previously, like many of us, I found it very normal to go to the stores and buy my stuff. But with COVID-19, I found myself buying things from the convenience of my couch. By the way, not long ago, buying things online and paying for them online was a convenience. But how it transitioned from a convenience to a habit, it went in a jiffy under COVID-19. Now, what that meant for businesses is that they found the e-commerce channel growing rapidly. And many businesses sprung into action and they activated their online channels. According to statistics, e-commerce sales grew by a staggering 30% between 2019 and 2020. As the e-commerce sales were growing, there was something else creeping up as well. And that is the disputes on online transactions. In the payments world, these disputes are called chargebacks. So in today's video, I'm going to be taking you through what are chargebacks, why are they so costly for the businesses, and what are some of the steps that businesses can take to reduce chargebacks. So, to understand the chargebacks, let's first consider what are some of the cases in which a cardholder or a user would dispute a certain purchase. So as a consumer, if I find a transaction on my bank statement which I cannot recognize, if I see an SMS from my bank which I cannot recognize, or if I receive a product which is defective, or it is not as it was advertised, what am I going to do? I'm definitely going to try and return the product and get my money back. Generally, customers follow two approaches. Approach number one is where they call the bank saying that I see a transaction on my card which I cannot recognize. I received a message and this transaction was not done by me. This is the chargeback route, the route in which the customer contacts the issuing bank. By the way, to know what is the issuing bank, you can refer to one of my earlier videos where I explained the four-party model, explaining who is the issuing bank and the rest of the parties involved. Anyway, back to this video. So, if I as a customer contact the bank to dispute my transaction, that is the chargeback route. Or option B, if I as a customer receive a product which is defective, receive a product which was not advertised as it should have been, then what I would do in option B is that I would call the merchant, Amazon for example, saying that guys, the product is not as you advertised and I want to return that product and I want my money back. This route is called the refund route. So if you notice, the key difference between a chargeback and a refund is that where did I contact first? If I contacted my bank disputing a transaction, it's a chargeback. If I contacted my merchant, which is the seller, it's a refund. So far, it may seem that the chargebacks and refund are exactly the same, right? As a matter of fact, according to research, 72% of the cardholders believe that chargebacks and refunds are the same. And if you're one of them, it's absolutely not a problem. I was one of them before I joined the payments. Anyhow, coming back to the topic. While chargebacks and refunds might sound similar, but there are key differences, especially when it comes to the cost. So let's go and check out. Let me take you through a stepwise process for the chargebacks. What happens in a typical chargeback scenario is that a customer identifies a certain transaction on their bank statement which they cannot recognize, or they receive an SMS from their bank saying a certain transaction has taken place which they hadn't done. So what they do is that they pick up the phone and they call the bank. Which bank? The issuing bank, the bank that had issued them the card in the first place. The issuing bank would make some general inquiries from the customer and then it would pass on the information to the acquiring bank through the scheme. The acquiring bank is going to reach out to the merchant through the gateway saying that a customer is disputing a transaction that has taken place on your store. Now, at this point, the merchant has two choices. Number one, to accept the chargeback. Number two, to challenge the chargeback. In case of challenging the chargeback, the merchant has to produce evidence of delivery of goods, or evidence of rendering the service, or evidence that the transaction was properly authenticated and it's not a valid chargeback. The next question is that why are chargebacks so costly for the merchant? Before we go into the cost, picture this. You are a successful e-commerce business. People are placing orders from their homes around the clock. These orders are being delivered to their households on a daily basis, and you're making a lot of profit on those orders. While this e-commerce cycle is very profitable for your business, there is a risk that the business always carries, which is the risk of disputes and chargebacks. Why is this risk so costly? Because whenever a chargeback is raised by a customer, two things would happen. Number one, you're going to lose that sale. Number two, you're going to be penalized with a heavy penalty which is called the chargeback fee. So there is a double whammy, losing the sale and getting hit by a penalty, which is the chargeback fee. To understand this better, let's compare this to a refund. What happens in a refund is that the customer would call you directly, not through the bank. And they would say that I'm not satisfied with the product, I want my money back. What's going to happen? If you think that the claim is valid, you're going to refund the money back. What you lose in that case is the sale. But in case of chargeback, what you lose is not just the sale. You lose the sale, in addition you get penalized with a chargeback fee. Why is there a chargeback fee? There is a chargeback fee because there is a whole set of parties which are involved communicating this back and forth, which creates additional cost. That's number one. The second reason comes from the fact that these chargeback fees are punitive in nature, are punishing in nature, because the schemes want to protect the consumer from poor merchant practices. So it acts as a deterrent for merchants to reduce the chances of fraud by implementing adequate fraud control mechanisms. So far we have learned that with chargebacks, you not only lose your sale, you get a chargeback fee as a penalty, and number three, you also come on the radar of the schemes for the percentage of transactions which are going as chargebacks. So for merchants who have a high chargeback ratio are monitored by the schemes, being Visa or MasterCard. Generally, the schemes would want their merchants to have a chargeback ratio of less than 1%. As soon as you cross those risky thresholds around 1.5% and more, the merchant starts getting into the radar of the schemes for additional monitoring. In case you breach those thresholds as well, the schemes could well ban the merchants and stop them from making further card transactions through their networks. Hence, it's very important for merchants to take all possible measures trying to reduce the chargeback rates. In the next section, let's have a look at what are some of the steps that the merchants can take to reduce the chargeback rates. So let's have a look. Guys, before we go into further details, it's very important to set the expectations right. The objective here is not to get the chargeback rate to zero, because that's not going to happen. Chargebacks are inevitable, they're always going to happen. So the objective should be to reduce the chargebacks. And what are some of the ways in which the merchants can influence the chargeback rates and can bring it down? So first up, having appropriate bank descriptors is very important. What are bank descriptors? When you see a transaction on your bank statement, it writes the name of the merchant, or sometimes not the name of the merchant. When it's not the name of the merchant, generally it is when the consumer gets confused and is more likely to pick up the phone and call their bank and apply for a chargeback. So it's very important for merchants to have clear bank descriptors by their trading name. So if I'm being charged for Netflix, my bank statement should say Netflix charge, and so on for the other merchants. Another important step that the merchant should take is customer education and having visible customer support. As a merchant, your objective is to bring the disgruntled customers directly to you through the customer support rather than going through the banks. So if a merchant has well-defined and visible customer support helpline available, it is more likely that the consumer would reach out directly to the merchant than to opt for a chargeback. In case of e-commerce sales, it is also very important to have clear product descriptions and photographs so that the consumers would exactly know what they're paying for. If the product descriptions are not clear enough, if the product photos are not clear enough, then it's more likely that a chargeback will follow. As a merchant, I would always want a disgruntled customer to come directly to me, to contact my business directly rather than going through the bank. Because the moment the customer decides to go through the bank, it calls for a chargeback, which comes with a lot of fees and other costs that we have talked about. If they come directly to me, I can resolve this case outside the chargeback process and still keep the customer happy. So it's super important as a merchant to have ease of communication line between you and the customer. The customer should visibly see the helpline. When they call the helpline, they should be attended by a person and not by an IVR which goes on forever. With these things, you can ensure a satisfied customer and lower operating costs. This discussion would be incomplete if we don't talk about friendly frauds. What are friendly frauds? Friendly frauds are where a customer would call their bank and dispute a transaction either unknowingly because they couldn't recognize the charge on their bank statement or they couldn't recognize the message that has just arrived from the bank, or knowingly. At times there are customers who do not play in good faith and they would try to keep the good and file for a chargeback to get the refund of their money. To identify such kind of behaviors and patterns, it's very important for merchants to have some sort of analytics so that they can identify repeat chargeback offenders. When you are able to identify repeat chargeback offenders as a merchant, what you should do then is that observe them for 1, 2, or 3 times and then proceed to block such customers from your platform. In addition to that, there is something very interesting available for the merchant, which is chargeback alerting systems, where the issuer and merchants are connected through our chargeback alerting system. So what happens in this case is as soon as the customer reaches out to the issuing bank for a dispute, the issuing bank would be connected to the merchant through this chargeback alerting process, saying that a chargeback is coming through your way. What the merchants can then do is they can stop the fulfillment of order, they can stop the transaction, they can do many other things in order to stop a genuine fraud from happening. What this does is that it reduces the fraud, at the same time it reduces the chargeback for the merchants because they now know it real time from the issuer rather than the transaction passes through the whole ecosystem, through the scheme, the acquire to the gateway to them. So businesses can definitely opt for using a chargeback alerting system. One of such systems is called the Attica Alerts, which provides real-time information and intelligence between the issuer and the merchant. So guys, what have we learned today? We have learned that chargebacks are an inherent risk of the business. You cannot eliminate them, but you can mitigate them. Why is mitigation important? Is because chargebacks are costly. They are costly because you lose your sale, because you get penalized with a chargeback fee. At the same time, you come under the radar of the schemes. Therefore, businesses should definitely take active measures to reduce chargebacks through the things that we have just spoken about. To be honest, some of those things are really low-hanging fruits, like having the adequate bank descriptors, having a clear customer service line. Some of the things are very easy to implement, and I would encourage all e-commerce merchants to go back and check if they've implemented each of those mitigating measures. Thank you.